Hi everyone, my name's Alexa,
And I'm Kestan.
and together we're here to show you guys the mobile application we have been working on for the past year, Growth.
Before we get started, we would just like to point out that 1 in 3 seniors die with Alzheimer's or another dementia.
Additionally, there are currently over 11 million Americans providing unpaid care for people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease.
Finally, there was a 17% increase in dementia cases during the COVID-19 pandemic. These statistics are only a part of the reason why Alexa and I are interested in this geriatric world.
Although the pandemic has impacted us all differently, it definitely impacted my grandpa's side of the family. My grandpa's sister had adequate cognitive functioning before the pandemic, but as isolation happened, her situation changed tremendously. And after a year and a half of lockdown, she was diagnosed with dementia and was taken to a nursing home. She is currently thriving and living happily, but her situation tremendously impacted our family.
For me, my family and my cousins have been taking care of my grandma for the past few years now. And over this time, I've kind of realized just how much dementia can affect an older adult. I visit her about once a month to see how she was doing, but for my cousins, they would come every single day to take her out of the house. After the pandemic, she was moved to a nursing home because her condition got much worse. Our computer science teacher knew the story about her relatives and was also aware of her passion for programming. She introduced us to Dr. Chalk, who mentioned how time-consuming and stressful it was for her and her patients' caregivers to collect and track the patient's daily routines.
We noticed that behaviors like hallucinations, sleep schedules, medicinal intake, and bowel movements were crucial for regression analysis and for doctors to determine possible treatment options. Being in charge of so much data, caregivers and family members were in deep need for a fast, secure, and convenient way to track all of it.
When I visited Kaiser Permanente over the summer, I was allowed to shadow our head geriatrician, Dr. Chalk. I was allowed to listen on a phone call between a different caregiver and a different doctor and a distressed caregiver. The caregiver kept repeating that she felt she had very little time for herself. She felt like she didn't have a life anymore because of her mother who had dementia. While on the call, the doctor handed me a sheet of paper. It was filled with scribbles, and I realized that these scribbles were a list of medicines that the patient with dementia was taking. It was meant as a log for the doctors to see, but it just further fueled the caregiver's distress. This gave us a drive for the project and gave us real proof that our app was needed.
In a study of over 200 caregivers of patients with dementia, it was found that 73.9% of the caregivers had actual symptoms of depression due to the tasks they face each day. And in another study of over 80 caregivers, 50% of those experienced symptoms of burnout. These were just some of a few reasons we decided to develop a mobile application that caregivers can use to easily track these really important behaviors. The purpose of our application is to aid caregivers in the tracking of their patients. Instead of writing down their data on paper, caregivers are able to manually track it with the touch of a button.
Furthermore, we want to aid caregivers in the interpretation of their patients' data. Not only will we allow caregivers to easily input the behaviors of dementia patients, but we also will display this data on graphs to be interpreted by doctors and family members. We hope that our apps helps facilitate the communication between caregivers, family members, and also the doctors, and so that everyone is informed of the patient's well-being.
After a lot of research, we identified 4 crucial determinants doctors and caregivers need to keep track of for accurate diagnoses. For that reason, our application is focused on tracking medicinal intake, bowel movement, behaviors like hallucinations or wandering, and sleep.
But before we could start on the development of our application, we had to figure out the layout as well as what software we're going to use. We first experimented with Glide to wireframe the basic layout of our application, and then we moved to Replit for collaborative coding. But Replit had the limitation of creating only web-based apps. We wanted an iOS-based application so that users could download it on the App Store.
Here's a quick tour of our Replit application.
Here is the small demo app we created on Replit. First, we created a home screen to house the patients and the caregivers. We made it simple to add patients with this button, as well as name the different patients. Our next screen was the patient screen, which included the patient's personal information and the 4 inputs we started tracking. Here I'm inputting data for sleep, which tracks the duration of sleep. Next was bowel movements, which tracks either stool or urine and the time of the behavior exhibited. Next was behaviors, which tracks the duration, and we weren't able to get to medicine. We collaboratively coded this demo app using React Native and Replit, but unfortunately, Replit could only build us an app on the web, not one for mobile users.
As you guys can see, this was our introduction to the very complicated world of app development. We realized that Replit was not able to meet our needs, and we would need a more advanced platform to carry out our project. Now, there are tons of languages and tools out there, but we were particularly debating on whether to use Swift, programming language developed by Apple, or React Native, an open source UI software created by Meta. We eventually decided on React Native, which allows developers to build nice design elements alongside JavaScript. We also used Expo to streamline the process of testing, as well as building out and launching our application.
Some of the extensions we included in our application were the daytime picker, data charts, a medicine API, and Firebase. Firebase serves as a method of authentication for our users, as well as a method of data storage. Through Firebase, our users have the ability to access multiple patients within their individualized accounts. And data stored is sent to Firebase's database, which only we have access to.
Now that you're familiar with our application, from what it is to how it was built, we have created a short demonstration to see how the app works in action. Here is our current application with an actual iOS simulator. First, we have our Google authentication, which allows the caregivers to access their patients securely. On our homepage, we have the panel of patients, which is currently blank, since this is a new account. We also have direct links to reputable dementia information sources, such as the Alzheimer's Association. Here's me adding a new patient. All of this inputted data is sent immediately to Google Firebase to be securely stored. We have patient name, cause of treatments, blood type, close contact, relationship to patients, as well as an image. Once we add a new patient, we can go into their account and see their info at the top of the screen, as well as our 4 inputs: behaviors, medicine, sleep, and bowel movements. Similarly to our app in Replit, we can go into the different screens and add data with just a few clicks. All of the screens include a notes section at the bottom to keep track of important information that a caregiver might have on a particular day. Right now, I'm inputting sample data for behaviors, as well as the duration of the behavior exhibited. Next is sleep. So time of bedtime, as well as time patients woke up. And finally, bowel movements, which is either stool or urine, as well as the time of the behavior exhibited. And finally, we have our final feature, which is our data graphs. As of now, because of the data making process, it takes a few seconds for the graphs to load. Once we launch the actual application, the app will have a higher processing time, so that data can be loaded quickly. On the x-axis of each of these graphs, you can see the data we inputted our data. Today is currently Saturday. And on the y-axis, you can see the value of inputs, such as duration for behaviors or frequency for bowel movements. Our data is displayed on a weekly, monthly, and yearly time frame. And as data is added over time, these graphs will continue to build up, and caregivers will be able to track patterns from this data visualization. Once the caregiver is finished, they can safely log out to protect this confidential information. We have met with and received feedback already from more than 15 different caregivers around Wahoo. Some are at-home caregivers of their family members, and some are caregivers at care homes. Some are even doctors and geriatricians like Dr. Chalk. They all had super positive messages for our project, and we also received some amazing feedback to continue making edits. We hope to continue receiving feedback and create this constant loop of improvement in which we continuously update our application in order to meet the needs of caregivers all over the world.
Recently, we learned that for some, the communication between families, doctors, and caregivers was non-existent. With the creation of our application, we hope to make this process simple and efficient so that families can log onto the application and see the behaviors of their family members with dementia, as well as the notes of the caregiver. Caregivers will be able to easily track all the symptoms of their patients and share the data with not only family members, but also doctors.
By streamlining the process of communication, we are relieving the burden of tracking behaviors and giving doctors a basis to treat their patients with dementia. We have the power to impact millions of people in the US alone, but also abroad. Finally, before concluding our presentation, our advice to future research students is simple. Don't procrastinate. Dr. Chan and Ms. Kobayashi are super helpful in crafting useful timelines, but you will only be successful if you stick to your plan and schedule. Another quick tip is to celebrate every single one of your obstacles, even if they seem really small.
We would like to thank everyone who helped make this project possible. First of all, thank you to Dr. Chan and Ms. Sokamura for really kickstarting this project and getting us connected to Dr. Chalk, our lead geriatrician.
Thank you, Dr. Chalk, for being such an invaluable resource, not only for information, but for connecting us with other doctors and caregivers. We are so thankful for your support and enthusiasm. Also, a big thank you to Dr. Nishida for your support and for being a great resource for our project. And finally, thank you to Mrs. Kobayashi for being our constant supporter and mentor as well.
Thank you all for coming.